From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
There are good dads out there in the world, and there are some not so good ones. And even the good ones aren't perfect, but we'd like to think that the vast majority of dads out there are decent guys who are trying their very best. But what if you were to find out something about your dad? Something very, very dark. Something absolutely terrifying. A long-held secret that takes everything you thought you knew about your father and burned it to the ground. What if that secret, that he kept for his entire life, finally started to surface after his death? And what if what you begin to discover is that your dad may have been one of the most prolific serial killers of all time? This week's guest experienced that very thing, and not only that, but his background as a highly successful homicide detective resulted in him being the one who finally put all of the pieces together. In part one of a two-part interview, I talk with Steve Hodel, who has written multiple books containing the story and evidence that points directly to his father, George Hodel, as being the one responsible for not only the murder of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, but many other unsolved murders over the course of a long career as a brutal and sadistic serial killer. Welcome to this week's episode, George Hodel and the Black Dahlia, on From the Void. All right, welcome to the podcast. It's a thrill to have Steve Hodel on. I've been following your work for a long time, so I've been very excited to ask you some questions about your ongoing investigations. So tell us a little bit about your background first and what makes you so uniquely qualified for this particular project.
Okay, great to be with you, John. Born in Los Angeles in 1941, 17 years old. I joined the Navy for 4 years. Then got out and basically did what most 21-year-olds did back then, was sign up for LAPD and 4 years military. And then I did 4 or 5 years in patrol and then went to Hollywood Division, was working patrol there, and went from there to detectives in 1969. I came on in 63 and basically worked all the different tables: robbery, burglary, car thefts, juvenile, sex crimes, and basically, went over and finally became working the homicide table. Basically stayed at Hollywood Division, and that's like a precinct on the East Coast. They call them precincts. We call them divisions out here on the West. And worked homicide for 17 years, basically 300 murder cases. I had one of the highest solve rates on the department, and it wasn't just me. It was a team of us, four detectives working together, and basically retired in 1986, was married, had 2 small boys. They were about 5 and 7 then. Decided to get out of the mean streets of Los Angeles back then in the mid-'80s. And a lot of gang activity and stuff. So we went north, wound up in Bellingham, Washington, which is like the last stop before Canada. And boys in school there, and got a home, and basically stayed there for 10 years and was working as a PI, criminal defense, actually. 25 years on the prosecution, and then I went to the defense side and criminal defense work. And basically, everything was going swimmingly until I got that 2 a.m. phone call from my stepmother, June, in San Francisco, and she says, "Your father's just collapsed. The paramedics are here. They've just pronounced him dead. Come down." So I flew down immediately, did all the things you have to do to the passing of a father or relative. And we're sitting there day 2 after his passing and talking and stuff. And June says, she walks out and she hands me a small book, a small photo album, about 5 by 5 inches. And she says, I think your father would want you to have this. And she hands it to me, and I'm going through it. And there's pictures of me, my brothers. I had two brothers. There were three sons. And my mother and friends and stuff. And I came across this photo of a dark-haired, semi-nude, appeared to be nude, reclining young woman. And I said, June, who is this? She says, I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago. And it looked familiar to me. And I couldn't place it, but for some reason, and to this day, I don't know why Black Dahlia came to mind, but it did. And it just kind of came and went. And it may have been because I had seen a television movie in 1975 called Who is the Black Dahlia, which was a made-for-TV movie. And the face and the hair and everything looked exactly like it. So that could have been the source. I don't know. But anyway, I didn't think much of it. It came and left. And so then basically do the things you have to do to take care of the burial and all that. His ashes were buried at sea as his direction. And I'm talking to my half sister, Tamar, on the telephone a couple of days later. And basically she's and now maybe we should do a biography on Dad, because to really understand this whole story, you kind of have to understand his remarkable life and what a remarkable individual he was. Do you want me to go into that, or?
Yeah, that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask after you kind of got clued into the fact that perhaps your dad was at one point a suspect.
Okay.
In one of the most famous murders of all time. Tell people a little bit about who he was, and he was a very intelligent guy with a pretty impressive background. But tell people a little bit about what he did.
Okay, a quick bio on him is born in Los Angeles, downtown, across the street from the Biltmore of all places, and which will figure later in the story. But he was born 5th and Grand, and grew up in Los Angeles, only child. My grandparents, his mother and father, were from Russia. They through Paris, they got out of Russia, and she was actually his mother was actually a dentist in Paris in 1901. Very unusual, highly intelligent woman. They came through Ellis Island at the turn of the century, came out to Los Angeles, and Dad was born in 1907. So basically, at age 5 or 6, he and his mother went back to Paris for a year, and he enrolled in the Montessori school in Paris, which had just opened. He was there just a year, and they returned, came back here, entered high school at South Pasadena, entered elementary and high school, had the highest scores of any student in the state back then, high intelligence, his IQ 186, 1 point above Einstein. Incidentally, that skips a generation, so my boys are in good shape. And he was a musical prodigy. At age 9, he's playing his own piano concerts at the Shrine Auditorium here in Los Angeles. His music teacher predicts a brilliant future as a pianist. He graduates 3 years early from high school at 14 and enters Caltech, the prestigious Caltech University here in Pasadena. And he begins there. He's there a year. And not only is he highly intellectual and a musical prodigy, but he's also sexually precocious. He has an affair with a professor's wife. She gets pregnant, breaks up her marriage. She goes back east. He's, of course, asked to leave after a year, Caltech. He goes back, says, I love you. I want to marry you. And this professor's wife says, George, you're a child yourself. Get out of my life. Go away. I never want to see you again. She has the child, which she aptly names Folly. And, and he comes back still, so now he's 16, 17, gets a job as a fakes ID, as a chauffeur's license at 21, drives yellow cab out of the Biltmore, for a while with another young guy that's going to law school, and his name is William H. Parker. And Parker, of course, will become our most famous police chief ever later on in the early 50s. Dad does the cabbing for a while, and then he goes and he becomes a journalist with the LA Record, which is one of the major newspapers here in Los Angeles. They had 5 or 6, and as a crime reporter. Now, this is in the mid-20s. This is Prohibition. He's riding around with LAPD Vice, they're kicking doors, speakeasies, the judge's wife with a young blonde. He's writing these tabloid stories in the newspaper. He then graduates and goes with the big boys and starts riding around with LAPD Homicide to their crime scenes and writing these tabloid, the bloody ace of spades next to the body, that sort of thing. He starts double dating in his late teens, 17, 18 now, with a young man by the name of John Huston. And John Huston is at that time just the son of the famous actor Walter Huston, who was a stage and screen actor of quite some note. And John would later, of course, become the famous film director of Maltese Falcon and many other classic films. Anyway, they're double dating, and John is dating a woman by the name of Emilia, and George is dating Dorothy. And then a few weeks down the road, they switch, and John and Dorothy fall in love. They run off to Greenwich Village, get married, and George looks at Emily and says, "I guess it's you and me, babe." and she gets pregnant. They go north to Berkeley. He enrolls in medical school, 4 years pre-med at Berkeley. Then he goes across to UCSF, San Francisco, gets his medical degree, has another affair during this time with another woman by the name of Dorothy, not the original one. She gets pregnant, and Emilia has a son named Duncan, who's born in 1928. Then Dorothy has a daughter named Tamar, who's born in 1935. So he's got the 2 women, he's got the 2 young children, or 3 actually, and he just graduates in 36, gets his medical degree, decides he needs some space to get away from all this, leaves them, goes to Arizona, New Mexico, becomes the sole surgeon at a logging camp, CCC, Roosevelt's camps back then. And he does that for a year and a half, doctors to the Hopi and Navajo reservations, does that for a year, comes back to LA and joins the LA County Health Department, quickly rises to the top, becomes the head VD control officer for all of LA County, in charge of venereal disease control at the time. We're now in the late 30s. Dorothy, who's now broken up after 7-year marriage with Houston, comes back to LA. They hook back up. My older brother Mike's born in 39. I come along in 41, and my younger brother Kelvin comes along in 42. So here's Dad, the head of LA County Health Department, with a beautiful wife, 3 young babies, and he buys a Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. home in Hollywood, which is this very iconic, it's a Mayan temple. It looks like right off a set. And we move in there, and he's doctoring to the rich and famous. He becomes close friends with Arthur Miller, the writer. He becomes friends with a lot of the surrealists. Man Ray, who was a famous surrealist photographer and painter, becomes our family photographer. And everything goes along swimmingly for a number of years. And then there's this knock at the door at the Mayan temple. And Dr. Hodel, yes, LAPD, you're under arrest for incest. Turns out that during these set parties and the wild parties and stuff that Tamar, who had come down a summer to visit us in 49, ran away. She's picked up by LAPD juvenile. I said, we're going to take you back home. She says, no, it's too terrible. And I said, what do you mean? And she discloses that she had sex with her father, our father, and big scandal, head of LA County Health arrested for incest. Dad gets the top criminal attorney of that day was a guy named Jerry Geisler, and he was like the Johnny Cochran of his day. Criminal defense had all the top, had all the top actors and actresses. Anyway, 3-week trial. Dad beats the case. Basically Geisler paints this teenager, my half sister Tamar, with a Tamar the liar brush. She's making it all up. It's all fantasy. Beats the case. He then, in early 1950, splits the country, leaves, and he's off to Hawaii, remarries there, goes to the Philippines with a Filipino wife, has 4 more children, breaks up from them after about 4 years, hooks up with June in the late 60s. They're traveling together for 10 years. He's constantly coming back to LA, in and out, or to the United States on a regular basis every year. Anyway, finally in 1990, he decides to relocate back to the United States after being out for 50 years. They relocate to San Francisco, get a high rise on the 39th floor. I hook back up with him after this estrangement. We become close, or as close as possible. And so I spent the last 9 years of his life with him and communicating. And I was very close to I loved my father because obviously of all these, all of these amazing abilities he had. And so now basically he dies, and we've talked about the passing. So we're back to the phone call with Tamar. So I'm talking to her on the phone, and she says, we're talking about the great man's remarkable life and all of this, what an amazing human being he was. And she says, well, Steve, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I said, what are you saying, Tamar? Where the hell is this coming from? She says, well, he didn't do it, but he was a suspect. The police that were taking me to trial on the incest back and forth said they thought he was the Black Dahlia killer. And of course, I said, well, there's no way. I mean, Dad had his faults, and I knew he had a hang up with sex and stuff. He's now got 11 children by 5 different wives. And I said, but no, murder, no, there's no way. I'll be able to show he had nothing to do with this. So basically, I jump in thinking I'll be able to clear him in a hot second. And I relocate. Actually, I'm divorced by then, and my boys are off to college and stuff. So I relocate back to LA in 2001 and start my investigation. 2 years later, I've got it all together, and much to my surprise, basically, rather than proving him innocent, I've made a watertight case that he actually was, in fact, the killer. I go in secret to an active DA, present my case. He reviews it. And the other startling thing was, John, that not only was he good for the Black Dahlia murder, Elizabeth Short, but he was also good for a number of other lone woman murders. And I lay them out. There's actually, I will eventually discover that LAPD was looking at 5 or 6. I actually came up with 14 that I think he's good for from 1943 to when he split. So not only is he the Dahlia killer, but he's a serial killer. And I present my case in secret to the head DA. He comes back and says, well, a lot of these look really good. I think you're probably right. But I would file, there's enough here to win in court, and I would file on 2 cases, the Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and I would also file on Jean French, the red lipstick murder that happened 3 weeks after the Dahlia murder. He says, those I could win, I would file and I would win in court. He says, the others, you're probably right, but I have a high bar, so I wouldn't file those, but you're probably right. So with that, huge, all kinds of controversy. I said, okay, I'll go ahead and publish the book. I wrote it up, published the book, and then, of course, all sorts of, lots of documentaries, 48 Hours, Dateline, they all covered it. And typical controversy, this is a daddy dearest thing, and, all kinds of people had their own positions on who done it and stuff. So basically, it's been ongoing ever since, and it's now I think 6 books are out now. It's really one ongoing investigation covering all of these various crimes that followed. And So 20 years later, 6 books later, and I've got, I think I will finally finish it with the early years, which will be out probably in about a year. Next year, 2022, I hope to have the early years, which are pre-Dahlia crimes.
Wow. Yeah.
Sorry it was such a long narrative, but it
No,
and I spend a third of the book, talking about his life, obviously, because it's important for readers to understand this guy and, his personal madness, and there's so many aspects to it.
Yeah, I want to dive into some of those details because some of the background that you just laid out is very important to kind of the connections that you would later make. And one of those things is, him driving cab, working as a journalist, and doing these ride-alongs with law enforcement, because the Black Dahlia killer later on would, use journalists to kind of taunt the police and play kind of this game. And then obviously his role as the head of venereal disease, and I believe you also found out that he had connections to a illegal abortion ring as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the book comes out, okay, and is published, and it's a big controversy. Well, within a month or two, Steve Lopez is a columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He's well liked by Angelenos and people across the nation. And he came. Actually, I went to him before the book published, and I said, "Hey, here's the book. Read it. I think you'll find it interesting." So he scans it quickly, and he goes to LAPD and says, "Hey, there's this retired homicide detective from Hollywood that says his daddy is the Black Dahlia killer." He says, and LAPD says, "Go away. We don't talk about unsolved cases." So he goes to the DA, Steve Cooley, and he says, "Hey, there's this Hodel guy, and he thinks he solved the Black Dahlia murder, yada." And Cooley says, "Well, I'm not spending a dime of taxpayers' money on a 50-year-old case." He says, "But there is a file. There is this secret file in the vault." He says, "On the Black Dahlia. Would you like to see that?" Can you imagine? Lopez, yeah, So he
Absolutely.
goes down to the vault. He opens it up. They take out this box. He gives it to Lopez. He goes upstairs, sits down, opens up the file, and out falls a picture of Dr. George Hill Hodel. He goes, "Whoa, he was a suspect." Well, he gets into the file, and he discovers these secret files that have never been seen by anybody for 50 years. And he discovers that, in fact, Dr. George Hill Hodel was the prime suspect all along. More than that, he discovers that a team of 18 detectives, half of them from LAPD, half from the DA's office, formed a task force. They pick up Hodel back in 1950. They bring him in for questioning on it. And while he's being held at the DA's office, they go out and they break into this Mayan temple, our home, and they put microphones in the walls, in the bedroom and in the living room. And these aren't phone taps, these are actual live microphones. They run a hard wire from the house along the telephone lines to Hollywood detectives to the basement. 18 detectives 24/7 for 5 weeks. So they're listening in to these live conversations around the clock. And of course, they come up with a whole bunch of damning admissions and confessions by George. He's talking to people. He's talking to one that's a possible accomplice and stuff. And all of these conversations, which I can read you a few of the quotes, but they come up with this. But the real key to understanding the why of the cover-up, and they say, why would LAPD cover up such a crime? Well, the real key is I'm reading these. So Lopez does a couple of quick articles, says, hey, he was a suspect, blah, 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 and leaves it at that. He didn't get into the weeds of it. So I go down to DA Cooley and I say, hey, can I make copies? And he's, to his credit, Cooley says, well, I let him, I guess I have to let you. So I made copies of everything, spent 4 months going through it, laying it all out, and it was just amazing. And I'm reading this transcript, 146-page transcript summary of all the conversations, and it says, George Hodel and Baron Haringa, who was a friend of his, go down to the basement. It says, an object is struck. A woman screams. more blows. A woman screams again, and then it's silent. And I'm looking at this, and I think, what the hell? They're 5 minutes away. Why aren't the detectives out the door over there and doing a rescue? They do nothing. So basically, and to this day, I can come up with a whole bunch of reasons why they didn't. The best scenario is, it was only the third day of the stakeout, bugging, and maybe they thought, well, maybe he's into kinky sex, maybe they're just having sex, it's all quiet now. What do? We don't want to blow, we don't want to blow the bugging. So that's the best thing I can look at. Anyway, regardless of why they didn't. And it either was a major assault, or I think more likely it was a murder, because he says right after the blows are heard, it says, "Don't leave a trace of anything." He's telling the. So clearly, I think and you have to understand, L.A. was a real life L.A. Confidential back then. It was a lot of corruption. Parker was about to take command, literally was 2 months away from becoming chief. And I think they kind of made a Machiavellian decision. It was like, okay, look, we could reveal this. We won't be able to take power. It'll, stop us from doing the things we want to do. Maybe we should just lock it away for now and come back to it at a future time. But let's clean up Dodge, get rid of all the corruption, and then we can come back to this. I think that was my take on their interpretation. And because Parker did do a lot of good, he did do a lot of cleaning up and getting rid of all that old corruption, which he originally was a part of. So anyway, that's the main reason why the cover-up. And there are a whole bunch of things that I add on to that and we discover. But I think that was the main motive for. And the other factor was that Dad split the country. Literally right then, he was about to be arrested by the DA's guys because they had enough. He split the country in 1950, and I think that probably added to their thinking, look, he's gone. Maybe we could find him. Maybe we can't. If we bring him back, maybe he gets Jerry Geisler and kicks our butt again. He's out of the country. And of course, the other thing was that he would have disclosed a whole lot of stuff. He was basically untouchable. And there was an abortion ring, even on the tape. I'll read you just a few of the comments from the tape to give you an idea of what he said. Let me get them here. Let's see. So he says these are from very. This is the best payoff. Okay, these are actual quotes from the recorded detectives' recordings. This is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies. You don't have the right connections. Made in the DA's office. Don't confess ever. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. Well, they investigated him a year and a half earlier for the suspected overdose murder of his secretary. The FBI were over to see me 3 weeks ago, he says. And he goes on to say, don't say anything on the phone. I think it's tapped. I have your phone. I'll have to call you. And then he cops to killing his secretary, put a pillow over her head, covered her with a blanket, got a taxi, called Georgia Street Receiving. She expired at 12:39. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, maybe they figured it out, killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary. And then one of the last comments was, I'm in trouble. The Black Dahlia passport. The police have a picture of me and the girl. I thought I had destroyed all of them. And that's just some of them. We don't have time to go into all of it, but very, very condemning stuff. And so that's the basic reason, I think, why the cover up. My two greatest heroes, the detective in charge of the Black Dahlia investigation was Chief Thad Brown, chief of detectives. And Thad Brown and Parker were our two greatest LAPD heroes, okay, historically. They were my heroes. When I came on, they were both still on the job and my heroes. And so I think, LAPD's position is they can't defeat my evidence. They can't argue that it's not solved. All they can do is say, we don't have time to look at it. And that's been their position all along.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider telling a friend and leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Join me next week for the conclusion of George Hodel and the Black Dahlia. And until then, thanks for listening to From the Void.